My name is Claire Bennett, and I was 31. The afternoon my future mother-in-law walked into my own bridal shower carrying a manila folder like it was a gift. There were 40 women in my sister's backyard in Savannah, Georgia. String lights, lemonade in mason jars, my mother crying happy tears by the cake table, and there was Diane, standing at the edge of the patio in her pearls, waiting for the right moment the way some people wait for a stoplight to turn. She waited until I was opening presents, until every eye in that yard was already on me. Then she walked over, set the folder in my lap on top of the tissue paper, and said, loud enough that the music playing from my sister's speaker suddenly felt very far away, "You don't belong in this family unless you sign this first." I looked down. A prenuptial agreement, not slipped to me quietly after dinner, not handed to my fiancé to bring home. Placed in my lap, in front of my mother, my grandmother, my college roommate, in front of 40 women holding cake forks that had all gone very still. I want you to understand something before I go any further, because it matters for everything that happens after. I did not grow up around money. My father drove a delivery truck for 26 years. My mother did people's taxes out of our kitchen every spring. When I met Daniel Whitmore, I did not know his family owned 3 car dealerships across the county. I found that out on our 4th date, and honestly, it never once changed how I looked at him. What I want you to understand is that I never once asked Daniel for anything. Not a ring bigger than what he could comfortably afford. Not a wedding at a venue that made his mother's friends whisper approvingly. I had my own job, my own apartment, my own life, built with my own 2 hands, the same way my parents built theirs. So when Diane set that folder down in my lap at my own shower, in front of everyone I loved, and said I didn't belong in her family unless I signed it, something in me went very quiet and very still. Not angry yet. Not yet. Just still. The way the air goes still right before a storm actually arrives. My sister's hand found my shoulder. My mother's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. And somewhere behind Diane, I saw Daniel come around the corner from the driveway, holding 2 bags of ice he'd just run out to buy, freezing in the doorway when he realized what his mother had just done in front of every person who mattered to me. I opened that folder. I read the first line, and I felt every woman in that yard holding her breath, waiting to see what I would do. I picked up a pen from the gift table. I looked up at Diane, who was smiling the kind of smile that already believed it had won. And what I did next, with that pen in my hand and my whole family watching, was not what she was expecting at all. Diane's smile started to fade the second I didn't move to sign anything. She had expected tears maybe, or a shaking hand reaching too fast for the pen, grateful just to be allowed to stay. What she did not expect was for me to close the folder, set it gently back down on the gift table, and say, "Not here, not like this." The backyard was silent except for the wind chimes on my sister's porch. "Excuse me?" Diane said, and her voice had that particular brightness people use when they're furious in public and refuse to let it show. I said not here, I told her, and I kept my voice even. The way my mother taught me to keep my voice even when a customer at her tax office got loud about a number they didn't like. "This is my bridal shower, Diane. My sister spent 3 weeks planning this. These women drove from 4 different states. If you want to talk business, we'll talk business. But not in front of my grandmother's cake." I saw my mother let out a breath she'd clearly been holding since the folder landed in my lap. I saw my college roommate, Priya, quietly move her phone off the table and slide it into her purse. The way you do when you don't want a moment to become something recorded, even though some small, stubborn part of me wished she hadn't. Daniel finally crossed the yard. He set the ice down on the nearest table so hard one of the bags split a little at the seam. And he stood beside me. Not in front of me, beside me. Which I would learn later mattered more than anything else he could have done in that moment. "Mom," he said, "what is this?" "It's a formality," Diane said. And even she seemed to hear how thin that sounded now that her audience wasn't quietly nodding along. "Every family with real assets does this. I'm protecting what your father and I built by handing it to her at her own shower," Daniel said. "In front of everyone she loves." Diane's jaw tightened. I wanted her to understand what she's marrying into. "I'm marrying you," I said quietly. "Not your dealerships." For a second, nobody said anything. Then my grandmother, 82 years old and sharper than anyone gave her credit for, set down her cake fork and said, loud enough for the whole yard to hear, "Diane, honey, sit down and have some lemonade before you say something you can't take back." A few women laughed, quiet and nervous. The kind of laugh that lets air back into a room. Diane did not sit down. She picked the folder back up off the gift table, tucked it under her arm like something she needed to protect, and told Daniel she'd see him at home. Then she walked back through the yard, past the string lights and the gift bags, and got into her car without saying goodbye to a single person there. I stood in the middle of my own bridal shower, my hands still shaking slightly, and Daniel took both of them in his and said the only thing I actually needed to hear. She was wrong, and I should have told her that the second she pulled into this driveway. I looked at him and understood, for the first time since I'd said yes to him, that the real conversation hadn't happened yet. Not the one with Diane, the one with him, about what came next. Daniel didn't go home that night. He drove me back to my apartment, and we sat on the porch steps until the street lights came on. And I told him what I hadn't said in front of everyone else, that it wasn't really about the prenup. I would have signed a fair one, drawn up quietly, discussed like two adults planning a life together. What I couldn't get past was the folder landing in my lap in front of 40 women, like I was being tested and graded in public. She's done this before, Daniel said, staring at his hands. Not this exact thing, but she did it to my sister's husband. Made him feel like he had to earn a seat at the table every single Thanksgiving for 3 years. And did he earn it? Eventually. I think it just wore him down until he stopped fighting it. I don't want to spend the next 30 years being worn down, Daniel. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said something I still think about. I don't want that either. I think I let her run things for so long because it was easier than the alternative. But watching her do that to you today, in front of your grandmother, I finally understood what it actually costs. It doesn't cost her anything. It costs you. 3 days later, he asked his mother to meet us both for coffee. No folders, no audience, just the three of us at a small cafe near his office. Diane arrived 12 minutes late, sat down stiffly, and folded her hands like she was preparing for a business meeting she already expected to win. I'm not here to apologize for wanting to protect this family, she said, before either of us spoke. You're not being asked to apologize for that, I said. You're being asked to apologize for how you did it. She turned to Daniel, waiting for him to soften it, to smooth it over the way I imagined he always had. He didn't. Mom, what you did at her shower was cruel. It wasn't protection. It was a performance, and you used her family and her friends as the audience. Diane's composure cracked, just slightly, at the corner of her mouth. I was married into this family for 34 years before anyone let me feel like I belonged. I thought I was helping her skip that part. For the first time, I heard something underneath the pearls and the sharp voice. Not an excuse. Just a woman who had once sat exactly where I'd been sitting, holding her own version of an unfair folder. Then help me the way you wished someone had helped you, I said quietly. Not the way it was done to you? Diane didn't answer right away. She looked down at her coffee, and for a long moment, none of us said anything at all. Then she reached into her purse, and I saw a familiar edge of manila paper. She hadn't come empty-handed. She slid the folder across the table, but this time she opened it herself before either of us could react. This isn't the same one, she said quietly. I had it redrawn Monday morning. I read it slowly, and it was nothing like the first one. No demands, no conditions about earning a place. Just a fair, simple agreement, the kind any lawyer would call reasonable, protecting the dealerships Daniel's father had spent 40 years building, and nothing more. My name was already typed at the bottom, waiting, not demanded. I'm not asking you to sign it today, Diane said. I'm asking if we can start over. Properly this time. I looked at Daniel, and he gave the smallest nod, the kind that told me this decision was mine to make, not his to make for me. I can work with this, I said. But Diane, if we're going to be family, you don't get to test me in front of the people I love again. Ever. Something in her face loosened, like she'd been holding a breath for 34 years and had finally been given permission to let it out. Understood, she said. I truly am sorry about the shower. Your grandmother, everyone. I was raised to believe love had to be proven before it was given. I forgot love isn't supposed to feel like an exam. We signed the papers 2 weeks later, at Daniel's father's kitchen table instead of a lawyer's office, with actual coffee instead of manila folders being slid across a room full of strangers. My mother came. My grandmother came too, and made a point of sitting directly across from Diane, the two of them talking quietly for almost an hour about nothing important at all, which somehow felt like the most important thing that happened that whole afternoon. Daniel and I got married that October, in my sister's backyard, under the same string lights from my shower. Diane stood in the front row next to my mother. And when the officiant asked if anyone wanted to say a few words before the vows, she stood up, unprompted, and told the whole yard that she'd learned more about grace from her new daughter-in-law than from 34 years of trying to prove her own worth to people who never should have made her prove it in the first place. I think about that folder sometimes, the first one, sitting in my lap while 40 women held their breath. I used to think that moment was about a piece of paper. It wasn't. It was about whether the people who loved me would stand beside me when it mattered, or hand me something unfair and call it tradition. They stood beside me. And that, more than any signature, is what actually made me family.